Hey, what's going on, guys? Travis with Preston, your main man, Preston. And so today I wanted to actually do a show for Veterans Day, me being a veteran. And this one is really, really special for me because so when I married my wife, I did not know that I was going to be marrying into a family that was so prestigious. So her great grandfather, Dr. Urbane Francis Bass, he was a medical doctor. So actually, let me tell you, I'm in Fredericksburg, Virginia. So he was the first, I believe, the first black doctor in this area. So he was, obviously, coveted and things of that nature. But so this with being Veterans Day, we're actually, you can see my family back there. We're waiting on a tour to start. So it's like a little walking tour in Fredericksburg. So, if you're into history, obviously, as I am, if you see my previous videos on different memorial sites, battlefields, and things of that nature, it should be really interesting. I hope you guys like it. Make sure that you pause, hit the like button, subscribe, leave a comment at the end of the video. And like I said, you could actually Google him. He received the second highest award that you can receive in the Army. That's how much work he did. He died on the battlefield, but he gave his life for his country. He volunteered to go to the Army, so that says a lot about the man. Obviously, I never got to meet him, but I met his lineage. Like I said, my wife and her father, who was my father-in-law. I call him Dad. What's up, Dad? So yeah, it's actually pretty cool. Hopefully, this tour is pretty good. I've never done this tour in Fredericksburg. It should be starting any minute now. We're just waiting on the young lady, I believe, to come, and she's going to brief us, do like a little walking tour. So hopefully you guys enjoy it. Like I said, I like putting meat on that brain. You know what I'm saying? It's not just about having fun or drinking or partying and things of that nature. Like I said, I'm a true traveler, and that I love to immerse myself in the culture, learn things of that nature. So hopefully this is fun and you guys enjoy it. All right? Peace.
The river hasn't always been this silted up. Back in the day, Fredericksburg was an ocean water port, and there was actually a slave ship that came here to Fredericksburg in 1728. The practice was already established because, of course, slavery had been here since 1619. So people moved here with slaves. Slaves were sold in Fredericksburg at the slave block, but also at Anthony Buck's auction house, where Sammy T's is now. We're going to end up there, kind of at the end there. The last ship, called the John Duncan, docked here in 1771. There had not been a slave ship here for 5 years. Most slave ships sold enslaved people at ports closer to the coast, but I just think it's really weird that there was a slave ship right here. But on happier notes, because I do want to celebrate the good aspects of Black history and not just the negative aspects, we're going to learn about a free Black family here in the 1850s, in the 1840s. Right here, on this strip of land right here, was the home of a free Black family of Maria and Adolph Richards. Adolph had migrated to Fredericksburg by way of an island in the Caribbean, Guadeloupe. He actually owned a 50-foot lot here in Fredericksburg from 1840 to 1850. They had 5 children. Fanny Richards was the youngest and was born in 1840 here in Fredericksburg. However, at that time, it was illegal to educate Blacks, free or slave. In fact, there were penalties put in the state legislature. If you were caught educating or trying to teach a Black free or slave to read or write, you'd be punished, fined, or jailed. The punishment for other Blacks doing it was even more severe. But the Richards were dedicated to educating their children. They sent their son, John Richards, up to Washington, D.C. to be educated. And the Richards had a secret school in their home to educate their younger children, which you'll hear a lot about throughout the tour. When Adolph Richards died in 1850, however, Maria Richards had put up with this all of her life. So she moved her family to Canada and then settled in Detroit, Michigan. Fanny Richards became the first Black public school teacher in Detroit and sued the Detroit segregated public school system in 1869 when she was only 29 years old. She taught for 50 years. She opened her own school. There's a monument to Fanny Richards in downtown Detroit that talks about her accomplishments in education, but she was, of course, born right here in Fredericksburg. So that's kind of a nice thing. Now, we're going to learn a little bit about Black military history as well, and we've got a special treat for you just down the road here. So come with
I'd like to introduce to you Yvette Blake, and she is going to tell you all about secret spies during the Civil War.
My name is Lucy Ann Walker. I was born in 1814. My husband was Dabney Walker. He was born in 1811. We're actually from Caroline County. We're slaves in Caroline County. And we found that the Union's troops were in this area. So we escaped. We ran and we escaped over to this area. They had a camp, and my husband was a scout because he knew the area, and he was a cook for the contraband, and I was a laundry. So we were in the camp working, and we noticed that the soldiers had a signal, a way of communicating. They had a telegraph. It was the first time that the President of the United States could talk to his troops everywhere because the telegraph was needed. So we got this idea to basically spy for the Union. Across the Rappahannock River was where the Confederates were. And you can see from where the Union were to where the Confederates were, not exactly here, but you can see their camp as well. So I got permission to go over and work for the Confederates doing laundry to make my own money. When I got there, Dabney was able to tell the Union troops what was going on over in that area, what the Confederates were doing. They were going to the north. General Lee was in the area, or he was gone somewhere else. And so they asked him, how do you know all this? How do you know what's going on over there? You're with us. Whenever you go out to scout, you're with us. How do you know this? So he takes him to an area where he looked across the river and he said, you see that house? And you see the clothesline? That's where my wife is. And when she hangs up the clothes, and how she hangs up the clothes tells what's going on with the Confederates. So actually, we basically were able to communicate through the clothesline, cleaning up the different colors or different types of clothing, whether it's the east or west, moving things off the line and on the line, and we were able to report that. And we did that up until 1863 when the Union left the area. So that's just a basic story of Lucy Ann and Dabney Walker. We actually moved to Washington, D.C. afterwards, and that's where we spent now. So I'm just going to give you guys, that was just a short summary on that, but I'm just going to tell you, this is some of my tools of the trade. Right? So if you put my nose in this washboard, I would normally have 3 of these. Wooden ones were the ones that were used during that time. Later on, the galvanized pans were used, and it would be, I'm just giving you a little short portion of it. There would be 3. One would be to scrub the clothing in hot water, and you use this to get it's called the fork. We use this to get the hot clothes out of there and put it into the soapy water. Another one would be soapy water, and you would just take the soap. This is why soap, and it's made of beef fat and tallow. Beef fat and tallow and ashes. We'll get straight pieces off of it and put it in the soapy water. And then, of course, you would use the scrub water. So, other things that are in here, you have to have matches because you have to heat up water to get the dirt, the grime, and the blood off of it. So you use flint, or they actually had matches. Clothespins. This is called bluing, and they actually make bluing today with a liquid. The bluing was give the appearance of white. We didn't have bleach, so the bluing would give the appearance of white. So like his shirt compared to his shirt to You see the church is nice and bright. But if you look at it, it looks like it has a blue tint to it. It's not really blue, it just gives you appearance. There are different types of blue in it they had. This is like a piece of it in a rock form. Can't starch. Actually, this starch is a newer starch, but look at the price on this. 23 cents. This, because I don't waste anything. When the soap gets small, I put it in here and then I shake it in and make it small. You don't want to get bubbles, you get soap and water. This is a scouring pad ball, and it gets out stains. Now there's another way to actually get other than gluing to get. Oh, one other thing. This is it's a sewing kit. But back during the Civil War, my day, it was called a housewife. Why was it called a housewife? Well, someone told me one time, I was doing one of these presentations, and she said that the soldiers used to take housewives with them. And everything that they needed that their wives used to do for them was carried in this package. That wouldn't be this pretty, but that's what they would use. Now, the other thing that I was going to say, what's special about this is there's another way that you can use to whiten clothing. And it's something that comes out of you.
Salt?
Know? What? Urine. And that's the chamber part he's holding there. Thank you for that. Any questions?
I heard that they used to like whiten sheets and stuff by laying them on the grass or
They would lay them on the grass with the sun would, if they didn't have a clothesline, or they lay across the bushes as well. So yes, that's correct. I'm a member of a group called, well, several groups, the Women of the American Civil War, and we just do reenacting in various areas in this area and sometimes DC, as far as Gettysburg.
Cool.
So this is just Barbara asked me to do a short version of what I do, and I have the whole setup. Everything. It was about 400, for every 100 men in a unit, they had 4 laundries. And the laundries used to be lined up, and we call it Suds Row. So all these laundries doing the laundry for these people, the soldiers. Got paid about, I guess it would be about 25 cents a load for today's money. It's 25 cents a load, which is a lot of money. That's why I dress so fine.
I have a question. When you went over to the other camp, were you worried that you might not be able to?
Very much so. There's actually, if you're interested, a woman just did this book, and it kind of told about, it's a children's book. It's told about the story, but it was worth the risk to actually do that. There's another book that I have. The first time I heard this story, it's called Virginia Shade, and it's by Norman Spoon. Norman Spoon lives in Falmouth, Virginia, and he wrote this book, and it's all about African Americans in the Falmouth area. So that's when I heard this fantastic story, and that's when I wanted to be this. What an amazing story! Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I just think it's such an amazing story, and both I think the Confederates and the Unions wrote about it, and it's documented. But unfortunately, we don't hear much about Lucy Ann and Dabney. Their own stories.
Well, thank you again so much. We're going to walk and take a look right up here. We're going to go in front of Shiloh Old Site, which is another huge part of African American history.
Thank you so much, Yvette.
Welcome.
So this is Shiloh Old Site Baptist Church. It's been the backbone of the Black community for 2 centuries. The Baptist Church started in 1804 and moved to this location. It was a white church, but free Blacks and slaves could attend in the gallery. they had to enter a different door. It grew quickly, especially among the Black population. By 1850, 3/4 of the congregation were Black. The white congregation decided to build a new segregated church and, quote, gave the old church to the Black community if they contributed $1,100 to the construction of the new church. So not so much giving, but charging. At that time, it was illegal for Blacks to meet as a church or a group without a white person present. They had to hire a white minister for $50 per month, but most of the preaching was done by the Blacks. So the white congregation moved out and built, I'm sure you can see the steeple of it, the Baptist church over on Princess Anne Street. And so this site became the Black church. But it suffered damage, of course, during the Civil War. During the war, it had been used as a barracks and it actually collapsed in 1886. The congregation was split on the new location. Half of them wanted to stay here and half of them wanted to move to a new site on Princess Anne Street, kind of the more of the center of the Black community. And we will go visit Shiloh new site later on today. Famous visitors who came here, W.E.B. Du Bois came here and spoke. And Mary McLeod Bethune, who she was one of my heroes as a little girl. She was really instrumental in girls' education and Florida. And of course, this was Lawrence Davies' church. He was a minister here. He was the first African American elected to city council, of course. He was the mayor of Fredericksburg for, I think, some 20 years, first elected in 1976. There's usually some beautiful interpretive signs right across the way there, but I think we have moved those temporarily. We'll use them temporarily, but we'll see that. Now we're going to backtrack just a little bit and walk across the bridge. But this whole area had houses along it. In some place, Wendy, has got some pictures. You could pass those around of what the houses looked here. This was a mixed community, Black and white. And so we'll pass that along, and we're going to kind of walk across the bridge here. So we'll not cross that bridge. I actually wanted to come and show you Chatham across the river there, because there's a great story of a slave rebellion at Chatham, which I don't think gets nearly enough press. So Chatham was one of the huge plantations in the area. There were 250 enslaved people on Chatham. And there was a slave rebellion in Chatham in 1805. The slaves had been promised a Christmas break. So like the time between Christmas and New Year's Day was considered a break. But the overseer tried to get them to come back early. And the slaves were like, no way. The community of slaves resisted, seized and bound the overseer and then whipped him. The overseer eventually escaped and enlisted the help of 4 other men to help him subdue the revolt. An enslaved man named Abraham was executed for conspiracy and insurrection, while 2 others, Robin and Cupid, were initially condemned to death, but were later sold south. Chatham's owner petitioned Virginia for the compensation for his lost slaves, which I just think is sick on another level, and was rewarded with $1,400 for his lost investment. But I just think it was kind of exciting. There was a slave revolt right here in 1805. And then Chatham goes on in history. In 1857, the owner of the plantation, Hannah Coulter, died. And in her will, she freed the slaves. And she gave them the choice of being free and migrating to Liberia, which we're going to talk about later, with passage paid, or they could remain as slaves for the new owner of Chatham, or they could go live with some of her relatives. The new owner, J. Horace Lacey, took the will to court to challenge it and have it overturned. The court denied Coulter's slaves any chance of freedom by ruling that the 1857 Dred Scott Supreme Court decision had just declared that slaves were property and not people with a choice. So even though she had tried to free her slaves because she had given them a choice, the courts of Virginia ruled that was not allowed. However, former slaves of Chatham participated on both sides of the Civil War. Charles Sprout enlisted in the Union Army in 1863, returned to Fredericksburg, and died here in 1926 and buried in the Fredericksburg National Cemetery. And Cornelius Lucas was the body servant for Captain William Pollock of Stafford. So he didn't fight with the Confederacy, but he supported a man who fought with the Confederacy. But he came back to Fredericksburg as well. He became a minister. He owned a coffee house just up on William Street and a store on Douglas Street. 1876, he ran for city council. So you can't keep a good man down. All right, so that's a little story about Chatham there. If you ever go over there, gorgeous, free, and they've got a pretty solid explanation or backstory of African Americans. This site, although unfortunately not this house, is the home of Jean de Batiste. He was a free black from St. Kitts Island, who is most known for French John's Wharf at the end of Pitt Street on Sophia Street, which Wendy will show you a picture of. It ran a ferry across the river, and it's just recently been restored, so it's 8 or 9 blocks down that way. I figured we didn't need to walk down that way. Let me just see where his house was. He fought during the Revolutionary War, and he served on the Dragon, which was a ship owned by Fielding Lewis. Fielding Lewis owned Kenmore, and he also owned the Lewis Store, which is the headquarters for our organization, the Historic Fredericksburg Foundation. Jean de Batiste had 6 free-born children, and his family actually became quite wealthy. They branched out into contracting, real estate, and shipping. He actually owned 2 schooners. Is that right? Schooners. And he owned 2 slaves, which again, I have a hard time, but there we go. His family bought the whole east side of Charles Street between William and Amelia, and they lived right here, again, not in this house, because this house was built after he lived here. But the coolest thing about him is that they held a secret school for blacks in the house. And they knew that because they were such a prominent black family, that they knew that the authorities were watching them. So they had it set up so that the girls, the female students would be pretending to sew like it was a little factory, and the boys would be making matches. But as soon as anybody would go away, they'd be studying again. So I just think that's a great story. So Jean de Batiste, you got the picture, is that right? Is that the picture of him there? And there's a cool picture of him. And I love that you should take a look at his picture, because like he looks like somebody from today, like dressed up in old clothes. He just looks really modern to me. I don't know. Now, his grandson, George, served as a valet to President William Henry Harrison. And then they moved to Indiana, where he was a hero in the Underground Railroad. They've got a statue for him and everything. And then they were harassed, and like Fannie Richard's family, they also moved to Michigan in the 1840s. So that's a little story about one of our heroes, John de Batiste. So that was actually fired from across the river and landed here. It's been cemented into place now, but I think it's kind of neat that they kept it here to do that. Just want to show that. So these are the offices of President James Monroe, who lived on Caroline Street as a young man. And President James Monroe was a prominent supporter of the colonization of Liberia and the American Colonization Society. So the American Colonization Society was a group of well-meaning abolitionists who bought land in Africa, kind of at the northwest corner, the part that sticks out, of Liberia. And what their job was to do is they wanted to buy slaves, give them their freedom, and then give them money passage back to Africa, which I guess was a noble idea. However, for many enslaved Americans, they had never been to Africa. They didn't speak African. They weren't even originally from Liberia. They were from, an area that was 300 miles away. So, well-meaning, for example, are we blocking the sidewalk? Is that what you're trying to tell us?
Not a problem.
But Liberia is named for liberty, and their capital, Monrovia, is named after James Monroe. There was a woman here in Fredericksburg who was very prominent in this organization as well, and her name has completely escaped my head. There we go. Ironically, I guess, James Monroe himself owned up to 250 slaves in his lifetime. So I
I guess it was nice that he had this idea of freeing slaves, but he didn't do it himself, which is so much of a conflict in American history. One of the cool things is that we actually had a guy here from Fredericksburg, James Cephas Minor, was an enslaved Black person from Fredericksburg who was freed and then went to Liberia by the and he said there by the American Colonization Society. He became the colony printer and published a newspaper there. So it's kind of neat. A little link to Liberia. All right, now we're going to walk up and take it. Well, welcome to Liberty Town. Now, Liberty Town is now the name of this really great arts collective, but they took the name of it from this area, which was called Liberty Town from way back in the day. This property was actually part of the original Kenmore plantation ages ago. It was bought by a guy named Seth Barton in 1799. And this was like the first kind of subdivision of Fredericksburg called Liberty Town in 1812. Now, after the Civil War, many of the brick houses in this area had suffered considerable damage. And Henry Dean, the son of a former slave, was instrumental in redeveloping this area. So ironically, what had been called Liberty Town then became a home for free Black men after the Civil War. Now, Wendy, some places got some nice pictures of what it used to look like. And some of the houses still exist, especially over on Barton Street. This is Liberty Street. That's Barton Street. Or the other way around, I can't remember. But Henry Dean collected house parts from damaged buildings in town and used them to build simple frame houses, mostly purchased by African Americans. Dean became a successful businessman by the 1890s. He owned all of the 600 block and most of the 500 block of George Street, which I'm going to show you in a bit there, lots on both Liberty and Barton Street, and a livery stable. He owned 19 houses and 2 stables. He lived in the largest house at 536 on what was called Dean's Hill. In 1909, a judge bought the property and then kind of redeveloped it into this, fancy brick neighborhood down there. And so I will show you some of the original Dean houses just down the road here.
So right now we're going down Freedom Alley, right next to somebody's house.
So that's Freedom Alley, which is kind of exciting. This is just a regular alley, so we're going to walk up this alley too. But I love going up the alley and see the back.
So yeah, like I said, that was Freedom Alley right there. All right here. So while we walk to our next point, I want to say, hope you guys are enjoying the video. Also, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, leave a comment in, tell me what you think. Also, give me some recommendations of other places of historical importance that I may want to check out and blog.
23rd United States Colored Troops were the first to fight in direct combat against the Army of Northern Virginia, which was General Lee's army. And they fought in Spotsylvania in May 15th, 1864. And this is what their white commander said. The 23rd U.S. Colored Troops hurried forward to the intersection of Carpathian Road and Plank Road. After skirmishing with the Confederates, the 23rd charged and caused the Confederates to withdraw. So a very successful mission, because we hear a lot about glory in the 54th Colored Division, but this division is pretty exciting. The 23rd was headquartered at Camp Casey, which is now the Pentagon, and included a lot of people from Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania, which is pretty exciting. They put some of the descendants to live here, and they just put a historical marker up in 2014 at the place of that battle. But just yesterday, they announced another historical marker honoring Black soldiers from the same division. There was 3 Black soldiers, and they're unnamed. We don't know who they are. And they were caught and executed almost right away at Madden's Tavern. And they're going to put up a huge granite marker there. And Madden's Tavern itself was really interesting because it was, that's where they were captured, but that was also a really central part of the Black community. The guy who owned it, Willis Madden, was a free Black, and he owned the first and only Black tavern, like in the whole region. And he also started the Ebenezer Baptist Church at that point, which still stands today. So really exciting, and that just happened yesterday. So that was kind of a cool thing. So as we were standing here, and this would have been, you know, where the Union troops were entrenched, going against the Confederate forces up on the hill there. There weren't any Black soldiers at this point, but soon there would be. I just wanted to point out again, there's a cannonball up in that pillar of the church there. And there's another one just to the left. You can't quite see it from where you are, but just to the left of the lens. Again, they landed there and they've, you know, been cemented in and painted around carefully, but I think it's a good idea. But we're actually going to talk about this building right here, which is the National Bank. This is where John Washington lived, who is another one of Fredericksburg's heroes. He was a 24-year-old slave of the bank manager's widow. He wrote a memoir in 1877, which I've got some papers there, one of the very few slave narratives, especially in cities where slaves were often hired out to work for other people. When John was 11, the widow sent his mother and siblings away to work in Stanton, Virginia. He was devastated. Then and there, my hatred was kindled secretly against my oppressors, and I promised myself if I ever got the opportunity, I would run away from these devilish slaveholders. 11 years old, he came up with that. 13 years later, he had his chance. On April 1862, Good Friday, Union troops moved into Falmouth, right across the river there. The widow told him, "Child," he was 24 and married at the time, "Child, you better come and go out in the country with me." He's like, I don't know about that. He told her he had to return to the hotel real quick and do some business, but he'd be coming right back. Instead, Washington boldly decided to test President Lincoln's new contraband policy by escaping into Union lines. He persuaded a few others to join him on a Union Army boat near what is now Old Mill Park. I had begun to feel like I had truly escaped from the hands of the slave master, and with the help of God, I never would be a slave no more. So he escaped. He worked at the headquarters of Union General Rufus King and eventually made his way to Washington, D.C. He was then joined by his wife and his newborn son, and eventually his mother as well. John Washington was one of the first enslaved individuals to cross the Rappahannock at Fredericksburg during this phase of the war, and many others followed on the Freedom Trail. So that's just like a true Fredericksburg hero right here. So it's John Washington, and there's a picture going around with him someplace. So it's very exciting. All right, any questions? All right, this is also the headquarters of the Freedmen's Bureau. It was headquartered here from 1866 to 1869. Its goals were really noble: to provide food, clothing, healthcare, and education for freed slaves. It also performed marriages. It interceded on behalf of Black plaintiffs, as documented in the Register of Outrages Committed on Freedmen. However, prejudice was very clear. So, for example, on July 11th, 1866, there was an assault on Minor Madison, colored, by Keene, white, with a hammer assault. But the mayor said that the assault was justified, supporting the white man instead of the Black man. Let's see. Moses Johnson was colored, and he was charged by Robert Hart, a white man, with stealing a watch and a chain 2 years earlier. Johnson proved that he had bought the chain, and the watch had been recovered by Hart 6 months earlier. Johnson was acquitted, but he was made to pay courthouse, even though he hadn't stolen anything anyways. Here's a picture of it as well, so you can pass that around. You can see it a little bit better. But this window right here is a window of Dr. Urbane F. He was Fredericksburg's first Black doctor. He was born in Richmond, went to college down there, went to medical school in Raleigh, came back and set up practice in Richmond, and 1906. But then he moved up here to Fredericksburg in 1909. So as World War I was starting, he realized that he wanted to volunteer. So he volunteered to be one of 100 Black doctors, and they were sent to medical officers training camp for colored officers in Iowa, and was sent to the front lines to help take care of wounded soldiers. He was sent to the front in June 22nd, 1918, and he was sent with the French because that's where they were fighting, and worked in the front lines. On October 17, 1918, he was working on some soldiers who had been injured at a forward aid station under heavy German fire. A shell exploded near him, which severed his legs, and he died before he was even able to be removed from the field. A hero right here, and I believe we have many of his grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren here. So all our Bass family. Thank you for joining us. It's so exciting. It's wonderful. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
John, you want to get a picture? Come on, Libby.
Come on, girl. So he is actually buried in the National Cemetery with the Distinguished Service Cross. And so if you want to go visit his grave, he's in the very first row here. To end up our tour, I thought we'd bring it up into the 20th century. So I'd like to introduce to you another local hero, Anthony Boutte from Black Lives Matter. So tell us
What's going on?
Like I said, she reached out to me again to speak here. I, of course, immediately said yes. But beyond that, it was an honor to speak in front of everyone once again. Our history runs deep in this city, whether we want to face it for our new generation or not. From John Washington himself in the 1800s, finding his way to freedom, to current day heroes of gay, Agdag or Jerry McConnell, or individuals that you find on your normal day walk to walk in our lives as youngsters, young adults, and adults. We have a duty. And as we got to watch in the waking of George Floyd, how the world was standing still thanks to COVID, I call it the perfect storm, in a sense. And I say that because when time itself was given the opportunity for everyone to pay attention and see, we got to see the brutal truth that we live with every day. We got to watch people mourn, but more than that, we got to watch our brothers and sisters stand together and come to a conclusion that our fight was never going to be over because the trail that was set before us was set long ago. On this current path in which we stand, we find ourselves yet again fighting for what we want to believe in versus what society tells us is true. So that we have to walk, we have to wear our hair natural, we have to be young men, we have to say yes sir and yes ma'am, or our identities at times are confused. Myself got to be in the forefront of a movement here in this city that was beautiful, that was sometimes shaky and pushed back, sometimes nerve-wracking, and more than that, sometimes very comfortable. Because all the things in which I named are things in which we embody as a Black man or woman every day. Our fight was not in preparation for us to find a solution. It was a solution that was not geared for our immediate outcome. I got a chance to sit down with a great friend, Xavier Richardson, who is a local hero, who's also painted over on the side of this wall here, and Reverend Urbane of Shiloh Baptist Church here. And I love the sayings in which they always come at me with. And one that I speak on daily, if not all the time, is from Reverend Urbane himself. And he tells me and he tells us that We are foolish if we think that we started this, because we stand on the shoulders of the greats who come before us. It took a very long time for that to sink in for me. I was ambitious and naive, and we always wanted to do things our way. Just like in the 60s when the NAACP was formed to help and to protect, Black Lives Matter came out of the wake of a movement to help and to protect. So here in our city, our Black Lives Matter, our movement, our story, our truth is one that we can believe in, one that we will never back down from, unapologetically Black, one that we can stand truth and firm with, but more than that, one that educates, one that wants to believe that our counterparts and co-parts are equal and will see us as that. But we have a job to continue to fight because it's in our culture, it's in our blood, it's in our story. Our time is here. Your time is now. Your time will be at some point, I don't know when, but it's coming down. It's coming down the line. Yeah. But when the day comes, and you guys get to look back on stories of your gladiators, your Michael Jordan, your poet, your story. I like the outfit, by the way, you'll be able to look at your parents and your brothers and sisters and see that their fight was not for nothing. That their story and how they taught you to grow is not for nothing. And here at home, the one valuable lesson that you can take from anyone is to listen. To always listen. Speak less, listen more. Because when it's time to tell your story, the room will stand in silence. The floors will tremble and hearts will be moved. Because you have a story that cannot be fabricated and cannot be mocked. It is only yours and yours to tell. So as history taught us, from the early 1800s, when tens of thousands of slaves roamed these streets in which you stand on today, or in 2020, when we undoubtedly took the same path as John Washington without even knowing. We tell you that history is one to learn from, but it is one for you to set and to continue setting. Thank you for having me today.
Pretty good, right, guys? Pretty powerful. All right, so we got one more stop, and we will be wrapping up this tour. So, what did you guys think about that little speech? I found it kind of provocative and moving, especially in my older age, as I read more and, like you said, listen more. I hope you like this history lesson on Veterans Day. I definitely wanted to give you guys something. Normally, I bring out stuff on Mondays, which I still will. So make sure you check out the other videos. I have plenty of historical videos that I brought out a couple this year. I plan on bringing out more later on. Like I said, happy Veterans Day to all my veterans, future veterans, past veterans. Also, like I said, I want to thank you. The name escapes me, but I want to say thank you to the lady that actually put this together for us, and it was really wonderful for my family to see their great grandfather. Like you said, you see him right there, grandkids, the great grandkids. So it's pretty awesome, right? All right, so Travis and Preston signing off. Peace.